Have you ever looked at a card and wondered what makes it feel so rich and eye catching? Well, for me, it's all in the layers. Today, I'm diving into one of my absolute favorite ways to add depth and visual interest to my designs by layering, and I'm celebrating it with Altenew. I've always loved working with layering stencils because they instantly bring your backgrounds to life and add so much dimension without a lot of efforts. Whether you enjoy stacking cardstock panels, building dimensional die cuts, ink blending with layered stencils, or even experimenting with mixed media textures, there's so many creative ways to add that beautiful layered charm to your paper crafting projects. And today I'm celebrating all things layers by participating in the Altenews Layer It Up video hop. For today's card, I'm using one of my absolute favorites, which is this Garden Gala Craft Your Life Project Kit by Altenew. Now, this set is packed with everything you will need to create a stunning layered design. It includes a large stamp set featuring these two beautiful floral images, along with some lovely sentiments that pair perfectly with those florals. You also get coordinating layering stencils, a gorgeous textured embossing folder, and matching dies to cut out both of those large floral images and the bold sentiments that you see here on the stamp set. Honestly, it is one of those all in one kits that make layering so effortless and fun. Now, this stamp set comes with two beautiful floral images, and honestly, you could use either one for today's design. But as I was planning this card, I found myself drawn to the smaller floral cluster, the one with the two flowers. And the reason is pretty simple, it has a much more open design as compared to the larger floral image. I knew I didn't just want to focus on layering with the stencils, I also wanted to bring in that gorgeous textured embossing folder for my background. So, choosing a more open floral gave me the perfect balance. It leaves enough space for that background texture to really shine through while still letting the florals to be the star of our card. And in the end, that combination of soft layers and added texture really helps those beautiful floral elements pop on my card front. I'm going to start by stamping both my floral image and the sentiment. Now I placed my panel into my stamp wheel and took a moment to carefully align both the floral image and the sentiment onto this panel. And honestly, if you wanted to keep things simple, this layout would make a beautiful one layer card all on its own. But for today's design, we are going to take it a step further because I do plan on die cutting both of these stamped images. Once everything was positioned on the stamp wheel, I stamped both of these images using obsidian pigmenting from Altenew. Now this ink, it is a rich dark black ink that gives a really crisp impression, and it's also perfect if you want to do any kind of heat embossing. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you probably already know this about me. I love adding embossing powder to my stamped images. No matter what technique I'm using, whether it's ink blending or coloring in with alcohol markers, I just can't skip this step. Now, there's something about those raised edges that really defines the image and that subtle shine it adds. I absolutely love how it catches a light on your card front. So before moving on, I stamped my images twice just to make sure I had a really crisp, solid impression, both for my sentiment and the florals. And then I went ahead and added my embossing powder to the stamped images. For my embossing, I'm using clear embossing powder by Altenew. And well, this is something I almost forgot to mention, but it's such an important step. Before I did any of that stamping, I prepped the panel using anti-static powder tool. This just helps remove any static or oil from the surface, so when you add your embossing powder, it only sticks to the stamped areas and not anywhere other than the stamped areas on your background. It's a small step, but it makes such a big difference in getting that clean professional finish at the end. Now, since we are heat setting the embossing powder over a large area, it's really important to make sure your heat tool is nice and warm before you bring it to your panel. I like to start by heating from the back of the panel first and then move towards the front. As I'm heat setting, I keep my heat tool moving constantly. This helps prevent the paper from warping. Now, for today's card, since we'll be die cutting these images, a little bit of warping is totally manageable. But if I were making a one layered card, I would definitely take my time here and be extra careful with the heat just to keep the panel nice and flat. Now, if you do notice a bit too much warping on your panel, that's super easy fix. Just place it under a stack of books or anything heavy for a few minutes and then flatten it right out. But one important tip, make sure your panel has completely cooled down before you do that. You definitely don't want to smudge that freshly melted embossing powder. And once everything is set and ready, we can move ahead to the next step, which is using the coordinating dies, we will cut our images. I absolutely love how beautifully these dies cuts out everything, just not just that floral image, but even the sentiment. And if you take a closer look at the florals, you'll notice it even cuts out those super delicate parts of the stem. Isn't that absolutely gorgeous? Now comes my favorite part, which is adding color to these stamped images. Now, you could definitely do your coloring before die cutting, but I personally prefer cutting first because honestly, the last thing I want is to spend time coloring everything beautifully and then risk messing it up during the die cutting process. So, once my pieces are ready, I place them onto my ultra sticky mat to keep everything in place. And then I bring in the coordinating layering stencils, which help me build up those beautiful shades of ink layer by layer. Now, this particular floral has two stencil layers. The first layer adds the base color to the flowers, stems, and leaves, and the second layer brings in all that beautiful detail. Now, before I begin, I will make sure that I align my stencil properly on the flowers, and I like to mask off the edge of my panel using some post it notes just to keep everything neat and controlled. For today's card, I decided to go with some beautiful shades of pinks for my flowers. This set is the Bubblegum Dreams Fresh Dry Ink. Now, for the first layer, I'm using fuchsia and magenta on the petals. Now, even though this is just the base layer, you can still build in so much depth in just one layer. So, what I like to do is apply the lighter fuchsia all over the petals and then bring the darker magenta right at the center of the flowers. That subtle shift in color instantly adds dimension and draws your eyes right to the middle of our bloom. So even just with one layer, you basically have two different colors to add depth and dimension to your floral image. For my ink blending, I'm using my mini ink blending brushes to lay down the colors, well, both the colors. They work really well for covering the base layer quickly and evenly. But if you're looking for a bit more control, especially in the smaller areas and with the darker shade, you can definitely switch to the micro or the detail blending brushes. And well, that's exactly what I'll be doing with my second layer, where I'll be adding those finer details to my petals using the detailed blending brushes. The same stencil also includes openings for the detail layer of the flowers. So all you have to do is simply shift the stencil and realign those openings with your floral image. Once everything is lined up, I like to cover the rest of the image with a post-it note just to keep things nice and clean. Now for this detail layer, I'm bringing in the darkest shade from the Bubblegum Dream set, which is Jazzberry, to really deepen those tones on the petals. And for this step, I like to switch to a detail blending brush. This is a much thinner brush, which gives me a lot more control, especially when I'm working in these smaller, more intricate areas. And you'll see how this layer instantly adds that extra richness and dimension to our flowers. Now, for smaller and tighter areas like these, I like to switch up my blending technique a little. Instead of going in circular motions, I use light strokes with my brush. I find that it gives a much more even coverage and it really helps avoid any harsh lines from the brush. It just gives you a softer, more controlled blend, especially when you're working with those tiny detailed sections. Next, let's move on to the foliage. For this one, I'm using colors from the Mediterranean Glow set. I'll start with a shade called Olive and blend it all over the open areas of the stencil to build that soft base layer for our leaves. And then, just like we did with the flowers, I'll shift the stencil to line up the detailed layer. For this step, I'm bringing in the deeper shade, which is Sugar Kelp, to add those rich shadows and dimension to the greenery. And you'll see how this two-step layering really makes the foliage come to life. Now, here's another little tip when adding color to your foliage. Try to keep a very light hand at the tips of the leaves and then gradually build more color as you move towards the base. This simple shift helps maintain that soft, cohesive color palette while still adding depth and dimension to each leaf. And if you want to take it a step further, you can even bring a touch of brown or reuse the same pink that you used on your flowers right at the base of the leaf. That'll add a beautiful warmth and give your overall florals a slight vintage feel. Once I'm done with all that ink blending, it's time to remove this little die cut piece from the ultra sticky mat. And instead of pulling on the die cut, which can sometimes damage those delicate little pieces, I like to gently bend the mat itself and let the floral piece lift off naturally. It's such a simple trick, but it really helps keep everything intact. Now that our main focal point is ready, it's time to move to our background. For this one, I'll be using that beautiful Garden Gala 3D embossing folder by Altenew. I absolutely love the texture on this one. It has such a gorgeous abstract design that adds so much interest without overpowering the card. You could also switch things up here and go with a beautiful wood grain texture or even the textured tile embossing folder for a completely different look. I truly feel that embossing folders add so much personality to your cards. Even if you keep the background plain white, that texture might not always show up on camera or in photographs, but in real life, when someone holds that card in their hands, it just feels extra special. It adds that subtle detail that really elevates your entire design. I went ahead and ran a 4 by 5 1 inch white cardstock panel through the embossing folder to create that beautiful textured background. And before adding any more details to this background panel, I wanted to stamp a small sub sentiment onto one of the flatter areas of the panel. So I stamped the word sending using obsidian black pigment ink from Altenew and then heat embossed it with clear embossing powder, just like we did earlier with the florals and the hug sentiment. And when you bring it all together, the sentiment reads sending hugs, which I think pairs so beautifully with that soft layered floral image. Before I start assembling everything, I just like to do a quick check to make sure all my elements fit together perfectly. And this is exactly where the whole design choices really matter. If I'd gone with that larger floral image from the set, it would have completely covered up such a beautiful textured background. And I might have had to even trim parts of that image to make it fit within this 4 by 5 1/4 inch panel. So choosing the smaller floral image really helped maintain that balance, letting both the background texture and the focal point image shine without competing with each other. Now, to add a little something extra to this overall design and really elevate the look of the card, I decided to bring back the same greens that I used on my floral image. I softly blended that green towards the lower part of the panel, keeping the color deeper along the edges, and then gradually fading it out as I moved towards the sentiment, letting it blend right into the white of the panel. This subtle ink blending does two things. It helps ground the focal point image, which is a beautiful floral image, and at the same time, it beautifully highlights all that texture in the background as well. Initially, I had added a touch of pink to the hugs sentiment, but as I stepped back and looked at the overall design, I felt like it needed a bit more cohesion. So I went back in and added the same green just at the base of the sentiment. And all that small change was enough to make such a big difference. It ties everything together beautifully and helps the sentiment feel more connected to the rest of the card. Now, these are those little design choices that you make as you go, and they really do make such a big difference in the final look of your card. Now, for me, this just doesn't feel complete without a few splatters. So, before assembling everything together, I took my panel over to my splatter box and added some black watercolor splatters. Before doing that, I quickly covered my sentiment with a thin strip of cardstock. It does not have to be perfect at all. All I wanted to protect the sentiment and avoid getting any big blobs of color over it. And those tiny splatters, they just add the perfect finishing touch to our card. Now, while that was drying, I went ahead and added some foam tape to both my focal point image and the sentiment. Just that little bit of lift makes such a big difference. It adds a beautiful dimension and really helps those elements stand out against the textured background. Now that my panel is completely dry, I'm going to start assembling everything. I'll begin by adhering my sentiment, placing it right below the stamped word. Now, I like to do this step first before adding the floral image just to make sure that the hugs fits perfectly in place and that I'm not interfering with the placement once I bring in my floral element. It's a small step, but it really helps keep the layout clean and well balanced. I can then go ahead and attach my floral image. And with that, all that's left to do is mount our panel onto a card base. I went ahead and used foam tape to pop up this entire panel onto a white top folding A2 size card base. I used a low profile foam tape for the back so it doesn't add too much extra height to the entire card. Now, since we already have so much dimension going on with the textured background, along with the raised sentiment and the focal point, this little foam tape in the back gives a subtle lift without making the card feel too bulky. I absolutely love how beautifully this card came together, but of course, we need one final finishing touch before we call it done, and that's a little bit of shine and shimmer. So, I'm adding some sparkle to the flowers using glitter brush pen, and well, that subtle shimmer just brings everything to life and adds that perfect finishing detail to our project. And with that, our card is complete. I absolutely love how this turned out. The soft layered looks, that beautiful textured background, and all those little details coming together so effortlessly. It really shows how layering, whether it's with stencils, die cuts, or textures, can add so much depth and interest to your design. I hope this inspires you to play around with layers in your own card making and create something uniquely yours. And since this video is part of the Altenew's Layer It Up video hop, don't forget to check out the next stop in the hop for even more inspiration. I'll have all the links listed in the description box below, along with the supplies that I used for today's project. Please note that all of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of my links, I'll get a small commission at no cost to you guys. And before you go, don't miss out on the fun and exciting prizes. Make sure to leave a comment down below telling me what's your favorite layering technique for a chance to win a gift certificate to Altenew. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.